The final step in integrating the Cisco Unified Communications Manager with the IM and Presence server is some basic configuration tasks on the IM and Presence server itself. Some of these may be optional depending on what features you are configuring in your environment, but let's walk through some of the basic options that are available to you. We'll start off by opening the IM and Presence Administration webpage and logging in as our application administrator. Once you've successfully logged in, you'll notice that the interface to the IM and Presence server is very similar to that of Unified Communications Manager. Let's walk through some of the key configuration parameters one by one, and then we will talk about changes and configuration tasks that you might choose to do from within the IM and Presence system. Under System, if we click on Presence Topology, we'll be able to get an overview of the environment as a whole. When you configured the IM and Presence server in the Call Manager, you'll recall that we created a Presence Redundancy Group. What a Presence Redundancy Group is it's a collection of servers, or the cluster of Presence servers, if you will. Each Presence Redundancy Group creates a subcluster, is what we call it. A subcluster can have up to 2 nodes within it. In this environment, we're only running a single server, and you'll see it listed, imp01.cisco.lab. You'll also notice that it says 1 users, so there is 1 user provisioned on that system. If I click on the subcluster, you'll be able to see some additional information. You'll see the name of the subcluster, the description, which is default subcluster. You'll see the quantity of assigned users, and you'll see the node in slot 1 and slot 2. Again, since there's no high availability node for redundancy in the lab deployment that I'm showing you here, you'll only see 1 server listed, which is imp01.cisco.lab. If I click on imp01.cisco.lab, I'll be able to see additional information about that node and status of the services. Make sure that you have started the necessary services on the IM and Presence server using the serviceability interface. I'm not going to demonstrate that process, but you'll be off to a good start if you simply activate all services. They're not all required, but it's easier to pare back a couple that you don't need once you know what those are. Looking at the service status, you'll see that I have the service name, the status of the service, the start time, and the uptime. You'll see that this server has been running for quite a while. If I click on the users option here and hit find, we'll be able to see the user assignments that have been created. And in this environment, I've only got the single user account right now for Josh at cisco.lab. If I go to Presence, Settings, Standard Configuration, you'll take a look at some of the most fundamental configuration parameters for this cluster. You'll see the cluster ID, and in this example, Standalone Cluster 56C48 is the cluster name. We have Enable Availability Sharing. We have Allow users to view the availability of other users without being prompted for approval. Now, that's a configuration parameter you might decide to tune if you want people to have to acknowledge access before they can add you and monitor your presence. And you have information of contacts for contact list size, maximum watchers per user, etc. In the beginning of this course, when we talked about the Jabber ID, or the JID, I told you that the default Jabber ID structure was SAM account name at presence domain. Well, that's actually evolving fairly quickly, and I think that the day is going to come not too far in the future where we're going to start using mail or your email address as the Jabber ID, because you're going to find a lot of organizations have or do not have alignment between SAM account name and the email address. So my SAM account name might be jkittle, and my email address might be josh.kittle@domain.com. So you've got the ability to use a feature called Flexible Jabber ID. Flexible Jabber ID is where you can change the parameters that are used to construct that Jabber identifier, or the IM address. And this is where you would do that. Now, right now, I'm using the standard scheme, which is user ID at default domain. So SAM account name at presence domain, or Josh at cisco.lab in this example. If I wanted to utilize some other parameter, I could change the IM address scheme. I'm not going to cover changing that value as part of this module, But if you're interested in using that in your organization, research the flexible Jabber ID feature. If I go to Presence Gateways, you'll need to make sure that you have configured your Unified Communications Manager as a Presence Gateway. I have not currently done that, so let's do it now. I'll click Add New, and it's going to ask me what is my Presence Gateway type. In this example, it's going to be a CUCM. I'm going to give it a description of CUCM Publisher, and I'm going to put the Presence Gateway in, cucmpub.cisco.lab, and I'll hit Save. Under the Messaging tab are a few fields or a few options that I would like to show you. If I go to Messaging Settings, we can take a look at the basic messaging configuration. The first checkbox is Enable Instant Messaging. Well, this is what allows us to IM using the Jabber client. You can also see there are options for suppressing offline instant messaging. There are options to allow clients to log their IM history, and there are options to allow cut and paste in instant messages. The default values are what you're seeing here, but you may want to change these depending on your deployment goals. Under Application, there are going to be a few parameters that you want to set to make sure Jabber Client is ready to run and does what you need. Under Application Client Settings, you'll be able to see the primary TFTP server where we're going to download our Jabber configuration files. Make sure this is pointed at your Call Manager TFTP server. In this case, 10.10.210.10. Under Applications CCM CIP Profile, we're going to hit Find, and I have not yet created a CCM CIP profile. This has to do with phone control. I'm going to go ahead and hit Add New, and we're going to type a name for my CCM CIP profile. So CCM CIP is just fine for me. Primary CCM CIP host is going to be cucmpub.cisco.lab. I don't have a backup host, but I'm going to pretend like I did. So we're going to say it is going to be cucmsub.cisco.lab. And we're going to make it the default CCM CIP profile for the system and click Save. There are some bulk administration capabilities within the Presence system. However, it's not something that you're probably going to use very often, but let me show you what's here so you know that it exists. Under bulk administration, you have contact list, where you can do an update contact list, export contact list, or rename contacts. I find that it is much more easy for end users to manage their own contacts than to try to deal with it from an administrative or an enterprise standpoint. But that doesn't mean that you can't. You can create a CSV file that includes the user ID of individuals in your organization and populate their contact lists using these bulk administration tools. I'm going to leave the specifics of that as an exercise for the learner, and we're not going to cover it in detail in this course. But it is possible, and I wanted you to understand that that capability does exist. That's about all you need to know for basic configuration of the IM and Presence server. Like I said, there's not a whole lot in here. As we've seen the IM and Presence server evolve over the last few revisions of Call Manager, we've seen more and more functionality removed from the actual IM and Presence server interface and appear in the Call Manager. So it's a lot easier to do most of the basic configuration. In fact, most of the tasks you saw me do in this segment are not completely required and won't prevent you from logging into Jabber. But go ahead and configure them anyway, because they will be important later on in your deployment. In this module, we talked about how to modify the Cisco Unified Communications Manager to operate in a fully qualified domain name mode, moving away from the previous best practices of IP-based or hostname-based deployments. We walked through the process to perform an installation of the Cisco IM and Presence server from the console of the virtual machine, and then we went through configuration of the integration between the Unified Communications Manager and the Presence server, including configuration of the SIP publish trunk. We also configured basic IM&P server parameters that are going to be helpful as you evaluate the Jabber product in your environment. That's going to conclude this module. I think we've given you a lot of the necessary information to get an IM and presence integration up and running. In the next module, we're going to start talking about some of the additional features and functionality that you're going to be utilizing as part of the Jabber deployment. As we continue on through this course, we'll get into talking about certificates and how they're going to be important. And I'm going to stop right there because I don't want to kind of give it all away yet. So thanks for watching. We'll see you guys in the next module, and good luck with your studies.